love to just welcome everyone to Citizens Climate University. It's a weekly webinar program of Citizens Climate Lobbies that provides CCL supporters with access to in-depth training opportunities on topics related to climate change and effective climate advocacy. I'm your host, Brett Cease, and this webinar tonight is the first in a series of CCL trainings designed to empower us, citizens, as we plan to meet with our members of Congress with the basic knowledge that we'll need to understand Congress and what it's like to lobby them as a citizen. Tonight, we're going to have the chance to hear from 4 diverse speakers, all of them CCLers, and all of them about their aha moments when the transformative power of citizen advocacy really clicked for them. To get us there, here is our agenda tonight. First up, we're going to have, for the first half, the wonderful Sam Daley-Harris. I'll introduce him in just a moment. He's going to be talking about making a difference and really jumping into our opportunity. We'll then have stories of empowerment and the citizen advantage highlighted from CCLers from throughout the country as they tell the stories of building relationships with their members of Congress. But allow me to introduce a man who needs no introduction. The New York Times has said Sam Daley-Harris literally wrote the book on citizen lobbying. Sam Daley-Harris has been called one of the greatest social entrepreneurs of the last decade by Ashoka founder Bill Drayton. And Sam is also the founder of Results back in 1980, and he co-founded the Microcredit Summit with Nobel Peace Prize laureate Muhammad Yunus, as well as founding the Center for Citizen Empowerment and Transformation in 2012, which then became Civic Courage in 2017. Sam coached CCL its first 7 years, our initial coach, and is still on its advisory board. And through his speaking engagements, Sam and his media appearances and tireless work, he is committed to bridging the gap between citizens and their government. So we're so grateful to have Sam up. And right after Sam, we'll have these 3 wonderful stories from Destiny Lloyd, CCL's Legislative Fellow, Grant Couch, CCL's Conservative Caucus co-founder, and Krystal Ford, a CCL volunteer in New York. But without further ado, Sam, and we are so grateful for you giving your time tonight. The floor is yours.
Thanks. Optimism is a political act. Those who benefit from the status quo are perfectly happy with a large population of people who believe nothing will get any better. In fact, these days, cynicism is obedience. What's really radical is being willing to look right at the magnitude and difficulty of the problems we face and still insist that we can solve those problems. And once more, that's from Alex Steffen, futurist, climate activist. He said, optimism is a political act. Those who benefit from the status quo are perfectly happy with a large population of people who believe nothing will get any better. In fact, these days, cynicism is obedience. What's really radical is being willing to look right at the magnitude and difficulty of the problems we face and still insist that we can solve those problems. End of quote. So I'm really thrilled to be with you. I have done this presentation at 6 CCL regional conferences since September. And since January, I've done it 25 times. And so the talk is intended for newbies. And what I say at regional conferences, the most recent in Troy, New York, I think there were 210 CCL advocates. I know you're not newbies, but I want you to see what I say. And so this is basically it. Advocacy is on a spectrum. And I'm going to talk about just one point on the spectrum: appreciative, bipartisan advocacy. It's different from resistant advocacy. It's not better, it's not worse, it's just a different point on the spectrum. And so the title of my talk is, Are Shouting and Silence Our Only 2 Options? And I am thinking of changing the title to Are Shouting, Silence, and Online Petitions Our Only 3 Options? Bringing bipartisanship and transformation to citizen activism. And I have 3 main messages, and this is my main messages for my newbies. And the messages are: 1, you can make a profound difference on big issues with your voice as a citizen, and I'm going to demonstrate that in just a moment. Number two, you probably haven't because of your sense of powerlessness and resignation about politics, especially federal politics. And message number three, if, it's always a big word, if you find an organization that's committed to dissolving the powerlessness, you can make a profound difference on big issues. And CCL is one of those organizations committed to dissolving the powerlessness. I'm going to start with my story, how I ended up here doing what I'm doing and doing this. I have a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in music. And I played percussion instruments in the Miami Philharmonic Orchestra in Florida for 12 years and taught high school music for 8 years. And then 39 years ago, I founded the Anti-Poverty Lobby, Results. And a lot of times people are kind of confused, music, poverty lobby, what was the connection there? When I look back in my life, there are several experiences that started pointing me in a different direction. I graduated from high school in 1964, and I played timpani in the orchestra at the graduation ceremony. And just before the ceremony started, a flute player came back to the percussion section and told me that a high school fraternity brother of mine, a year younger, had died the day before in a tractor-trailer accident in Georgia. It was her next-door neighbor, so she knew about it before I did. I always say I was 17. When I was 17, mortality was an irrelevant concept. But during the mourning period and the funeral, and after the funeral, I went with my friend's younger brother to pick up his report card from the homeroom teacher. It began to dawn on me that maybe I had 17 more minutes or months or years, and the questions of purpose started to come up. Why am I here? What am I here to do? What's my purpose? 4 years later, college graduation, 1968, Robert Kennedy's assassinated right around those days of college graduation. And it's another one of those, what is this life? What is this death? Why am I here? What am I here to do? No answers, but the questions are getting clearer. 9 years later, 1977, I always say I'm a little slow, I'm invited to a presentation on ending world hunger put on by the Hunger Project. And I go to this thing thinking, well, hunger's inevitable. What do I know? I'm a musician. That's the way normal folks think. Well, it's inevitable, I thought, because there are no solutions, because if there were solutions, somebody would have done something by now. But I go to this presentation in 1977, and it's really obvious right away. There's no mystery to growing food or clean water or basic health or literacy. I'm not hopeless about the perceived lack of solutions. I'm hopeless about human nature, people. We'll just never get around to doing the things that can be done. But there's one human nature I have some control over, my own, and my questions, why am I here? What am I here to do? So I get involved in a big way. This is the end of the story. In 1978 and 1979, I speak to 7,000 high school students, classroom by classroom. And just before going into the first classroom, I read some statements from the US National Academy of Sciences, Food, Nutrition Study, and others calling for the political will to end hunger. So I asked 7,000 high school students, what's the name of your member of Congress? I don't want to know if you wrote him. I don't want to know if you met him, just the name. And this is my epiphany moment. Out of, well, moments over 2 years, out of 7,000 students asked, 200 could answer correctly, just under 3%. 6,800 could not tell me the name of their representative. Just over 97% could not tell me. And results grew out of this gap between the calls for the political will to end hunger on the one hand and the lack of basic information on who represented us in Washington on the other. And so I'm going to go into this section that's the first main message. You can make a profound difference on big issues with your voice as a citizen. Results volunteers started lobbying on child survival in the early 1980s, and UNICEF, the UN Children's Fund, was reporting in the early 80s that 41,000 children around the world were dying every day from largely preventable, underlined preventable, malnutrition and disease. Things like measles, coupled with, oddly enough, measles, coupled with malnutrition, and things like that. And results volunteers lobbied every year, not for the whole year, but usually in the first months of the year on appropriations, 84, 85, every year, 96, 97, every year, 1003, 2003, 2004, on child survival issues and maternal and child health. And the latest report from UNICEF is that the 41,000 child deaths a day around the world has dropped to 15,300. So that's the first inkling of you can make a profound difference on big issues with your voice as a citizen. 6 years ago, in a New York Times article, former UNICEF Deputy Executive Director Kul Gautam was quoted as saying, to a great extent, it was because of the receptivity created by results that the US funding for child survival increased so dramatically, and that led many other countries to come on board. So now I'm going to bring it up to today, and if you can look at the top row is maternal and child health. Maternal and child health is one of those accounts in foreign aid that's driven the decline in child deaths around the world. And in 2018, it was funded at $829.5 million. And President Trump, for this year, 2019, asked for a 25% cut to the global fund, to maternal and child health. Results volunteers got 153 Republicans and Democrats to sign one letter to the leaders of the subcommittee of appropriations that appropriates these funds. Now, this subcommittee that starts the funding process has 9 members on it. When a committee with 9 members gets a letter signed by 153 of their colleagues, they pay attention. They don't want a vote of no confidence. The end result was, for this year, instead of a 25% cut, there was a slight 0.5% increase to the maternal and child health account. So this is one of my examples of you can make a profound difference on big issues with your voice as a citizen. Now, I'm going to go a little deeper now, and I'm going to look at the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, TB, and Malaria. And it, along with its partners, have saved 27 million lives, and in 2017 provided antiretroviral therapy to 17.5 million people. And I'm just going to show you this at the bottom. Last year, the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, TB, and Malaria was funded from the US at $1.35 billion. And President Trump called for a 31% cut for this year. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to take it out of the 1.35 billion, 31% cut, and get it more to the heart, get it more to the emotion. And I'm going to do that by reading an excerpt from a book by Stephen Lewis called Race Against Time. Stephen Lewis was Kofi Annan's special envoy for AIDS in Africa in the 2000s. At that time, there were probably 50,000 people on antiretroviral therapy. And so it's really at the height of the AIDS crisis. And in his book, and in this chapter, he's talking about young girls who can only go to school when they don't have to stay home and care for their mom who's ill. And then he talks about grandparents who are caring for their grandchildren because their own children and their spouses have all passed away. And in this last section, he's talking about where there are no parents and no grandparents, and the households are headed by the siblings, the children themselves. And I'm going to read that section. In this fourth story, Lewis tells how he and Gracia Michelle, the wife of the late Nelson Mandela, I've told this story a number of times because the experience had a profound impact on me. At the moment that Gracia asked her questions, I thought to myself, that's what's happening right across the continent. The transfer of love and knowledge and values and experience from one generation to the next is gone. And with it goes the confidence and security and sense of place, which children normally take for granted. Children already traumatized by the death of their parents are left reeling as they confront the void in the aftermath. As we were leaving, I asked the oldest sister, "Who puts you to bed at night?" "I put everyone to bed," she replied. "But bedtimes can be pretty scary," I offered. "The nights are dark, the dreams can be upsetting. Don't any of the neighbors come in to help?" "No," she said matter-of-factly. "I put them to bed myself. I'm the mother." End of quote. And so I really wanted to take it out of the statistics and the data and into the heart. And so, as I said, the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, Tuberculosis, and Malaria was funded by the US at $1.35 billion last year. The president asked for a 31% cut for this year, and 162 Republicans and Democrats in the House signed one letter to the top appropriators. Again, that subcommittee has 9 members on it, and they get a letter from 162 of their Republican and Democrat colleagues urging them to reject the cut. And in fact, that is what they did with a 0% cut. So if our voices as citizens can make such a profound difference on big issues, why don't more of us get involved? That leads to our sense of powerlessness. Francis Moore Lepay, who wrote the book Diet for a Small Planet 40 or 50 years ago, in a more recent book wrote this: "Our real problem is not a heating planet or rampant malnutrition. We only have one real problem: our own feelings of powerlessness to manifest the solutions right in front of our noses." And that's the gift I always tell the newbies of the groups I coach, their deep commitment to dissolving the powerlessness. And you're in one of them, CCL. Again, if our voices as citizens can make such a profound difference on big issues, why don't more of us get involved? That leads to our resignation. Harvard professor Lawrence Lessig, 3 years ago, said the following. He said, "We did a poll and found that 96% of Americans believe it important to reduce the influence of money in politics. Wouldn't it be great if that was the end of the quote?" But it's not. 96% of Americans believe it important to reduce the influence of money in politics, but 91% say it isn't possible. That's the politics of resignation. But the politics of resignation gives you a perfect strategy for winning. How do we thaw that resignation? Because once we do, then I think we have a real chance of winning. So here's a common view of most groups doing advocacy work that are not really up for thawing the resignation. I was talking with the head of organizing for a group that you would know really well, and he said to me, "We can't let our volunteers write letters to the editor or op-eds because they'll get it wrong and misrepresent the organization." And I would show the next slide. In 2017, and 18 too, Citizen Climate Lobby volunteers had more than 4,200 letters to the editor and op-eds published. So one group is saying they'll get it wrong and misrepresent the organization. The other group is saying, what do we got to do to help them get it right? And give that to them so they can have breakthroughs. I also go over that CCL volunteers in the last Congress enrolled 45 Republicans and 45 Democrats in joining the House Climate Solutions Caucus. How else does it work? The champion scale, where volunteers work to move those who are opposed up to neutral, and those who are neutral up to being supporters. Not done yet. Moving supporters up to being advocates, advocates up to being leaders, and eventually leaders up to being champions. And then I show this sheet to my newbies, and I say, if you would like to pick one of these organizations, I said, if you find an organization that's committed to dissolving the powerlessness, you can make a profound difference. So I give them results on ending poverty, CCL on climate change solutions, the Quaker Lobby, FCNL on repealing the authorization for the use of military force, and American Promise on getting money out of politics. I don't pass it out yet. I'm just letting them know what's coming as we get a little bit further. And so this last section is one aspect of the civic courage process is a spiritual approach to politics, a politics of love. And so I'm going to read one more, do one more reading, and it's going to be a section from Reclaiming Our Democracy. And it's from about 6 years ago or so, 7 years ago. And the volunteer's name is Ellie Sparks, no longer a volunteer. And she's in Richmond, Virginia. And one of the Congress people she's writing about and working with is Eric Cantor, who was the House Majority Leader at the time. And the paper was the Richmond Times-Dispatch. And Ellie says in the beginning part that when she joined CCL, she was suffering from climate trauma. She would read Bill McKibben's book, Earth, and she would weep at home and she would weep at work. And then she joined CCL, and 18 months later, she's co-leading a workshop on creating relationships with members of Congress and editorial writers. So I'm going to read this excerpt in this Politics of Love section of the talk. Our director, Mark Reynolds, likes to say, we're betting the farm on relationships. Then he tells us we need to build relationships with members of Congress and editorial writers. Most of us CCL volunteers have never done that before. What in the world does a relationship with a member of Congress look like? And how do we connect with an editorial page editor? Some of us have found models for those relationships in other parts of our lives. Gary in Boston uses the model of a work relationship. My relationship model is different. I adore romantic relationships, so I use romance as my model. That first meeting with the editorial writer, it's like a blind date, only you've decided beforehand you're going to marry this fellow. You're going to be sweet and interesting, but not too intense. If it doesn't work out with the editor, you're going to marry one of his friends at the newspaper, the business editor, environment writer, city editor. Someone at this paper will find you interesting and compelling. It's just a matter of being persistent until you find the right connection. I see the relationship with a member of Congress as an arranged marriage. If you live in her district, the member's aide has to meet with you. That's what our Congressman's Ledge Director told us in January. Since then, we've met 5 times with the Ledge Director in 2012. We schedule 45-minute meetings. He keeps us well over an hour. He doesn't want us to leave. Why? Because a good arranged marriage starts out cold and heats up over time. That's different from a love match, which starts out hot and slowly cools down. And I'm going to skip 2 paragraphs and get to the real heart of the matter. She says, during our conference, the CCL conference in 2012, I met with 20 congressional offices. I met with many folks whose view of the world was very different than mine. Going into their offices was hard. I had to let go of a lot of emotional baggage. I could no longer judge them or hold hostility in my heart towards them. I had to let go of my fear of climate change and my fear that they wouldn't listen to me. I had to center myself in love. Releasing fear and centering in love, this is sacred and profound work, end of quote. And so basically, she's going from climate trauma to sacred and profound. Tom Moyer, a CCL volunteer who worked with former Representative Mia Love of Utah, said the following in E&E News in September 2017. He said, "It's impossible to convince anyone of anything if you fundamentally don't like them. If you walk in thinking they're an idiot and evil, you're done from the start. It doesn't matter how logical your position is. You have to put yourself in a place where you can find something to respect in them." So again, one aspect of the civic courage process is a spiritual approach to politics, a politics of love. You might have a low opinion of your member of Congress, but you have to decide whether your goal is to be right about that or to cause a transformation. It's really up to you, but we'll never get climate change reversed, poverty eliminated, Citizens United overturned, or nuclear war prevented with Democrats only or Republicans only. It has to be a bipartisan, transpartisan effort. Basically, you're looking for an organization that can encourage you to move out of your comfort zone and over to where the magic happens. I'm going to close with this quote. This is from George Bernard Shaw's Man and Superman. This is the true joy in life, the being used for a purpose, recognized by yourself as a mighty one, the being a force of nature, instead of a selfish, feverish little clod of ailments and grievances, complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. I am of the opinion that my life belongs to the whole community, and it is my privilege to do for it whatever I can. I want to be thoroughly used up when I die, for the harder I work, the more I live. I rejoice in life for its own sake. Life is no brief candle to me. It is a sort of splendid torch which I've got hold of for the moment, and I want to make it burn as brightly as possible before handing it on to future generations, end of quote. We can move on to the second part. So it's a thrill to be with you.
Bravo, bravo. Thank you so much, Sam, for being here. If you haven't yet, Reclaiming Our Democracy, I know has been a book study that CCL's run at least once and that chapters throughout the country have enjoyed. If you haven't had a chance yet to read it and you're looking for something inspirational over the summer, can't say enough how much this will really put faith back into your own empowerment and really help you in seeing your own involvement in breaking that, the divide between people and the government, as the book's title says. So, Sam, thank you. Do you have any words of closing before we transition?
Yeah, I do. I love you guys.
Well, we are so grateful, Sam, and please feel free to stick around if you'd like. We at this point are going to transition to talking a little bit more about what the framework that you've talked about looks like for CCLers throughout the country, especially as we get ready for Lobby Day. But again, thank you for being on the line so very much tonight. All right, so let's actually talk about some individuals that have experienced a sense of empowerment and really actually benefited from their own experiences in participating within and wrapping their arms around their government. And I think I'd like to start again by zooming out just a little bit. This beautiful face is Marshall Saunders, the founder of CCL, and I think Marshall always makes a great case for what it means to be an engaged and active citizen. You know, as founder, Marshall's aha moment himself came when he realized that ordinary people, like he says here in this quote, like you and me, have to organize, have to educate ourselves, give up our sense of powerlessness and hopelessness, and gain the skills to be effective with our government. We are truly blessed to live in a country where citizen engagement is actually valued and encouraged. The word lobbying at times may carry with it some negative connotations, stemming from the practice of paid professional people that do it for a living. However, for us as citizens, it's not only our right, but our civic duty to be engaged and to express our voice. And as CCL loves reminding all of us, politicians don't create political will, they respond to it, right? Well, there are a lot of folks in CCL, I'm looking at them right now tonight, and throughout the network, who have firsthand knowledge of how to become and how they've become a more effective citizen. And we've asked a few of them to join us for this lesson to share their stories so that they can share with you what it means to be a citizen lobbyist. And first up, what I'd love to do is have the chance to feature our very own Destiny Lloyd. Destiny serves as CCL's regional fellow within higher education under Claire Feng, as one of the coordinators to help reach out on campuses throughout the country. She's been absolutely instrumental in starting and helping support groups throughout Texas to Florida, all along the Gulf Coast. And as of January, Destiny has also begun a legislative fellowship in the DC office, working with Andres Jimenez, one of CCL's senior directors of government affairs. I'm going to put a link to Destiny's story in the chat, but you're more than welcome to sit back and enjoy her reflections on the power of citizen advocacy. Each of these 3 vignettes is about 4 minutes each, so please enjoy Destiny's reflections here as we get started.
CCL has been tremendously transformational for me, both personally and through political advocacy work. Before becoming a volunteer with CCL, I was in school and wanted to do more than just learn about the issues in the classroom. I wanted to actually do something about it. I had all this energy and I didn't really know where to gear it towards until I found out about CCL. And CCL not only gave me a path to use that energy, but taught me how to be politically engaged in ways I had previously not known. I have become personally and politically empowered, knowing how I can participate in my government. I have become so much more knowledgeable about the workings of Congress, and I've been able to build on both soft and hard skills. Personally, CCL has allowed me to realize the potential of my abilities and instilled confidence in myself to work toward meaningful change within society. Being part of CCL has also given me a new passion to help others realize their potentials to do the same. So CCL offers a great amount of experiences, and among those that I'm most proud of being a part of is having the opportunity to help young adults realize their potential and learn how their skills, interests, and voices can be part of moving climate solutions forward. And whenever I am asked the question, who is it that I look up to? I have to say it's the students that I get to work with, and the honor and the pleasure of learning from them and seeing how courageous they are and working in either locally on the national front to combat climate change. And so a part of that, I have been able to expand my comfort zone and be led to new and unknown places that I hadn't experienced before. I would have never imagined being able to walk the halls of Congress, have conversations with members of Congress, and actually feel like I'm being heard. Being able to participate in the political process and communicate with our representatives has been one of the most comfort zone expanding experiences CCL has afforded me. I would have never thought that it could be possible to meet with members, and CCL has been able to show me the way to do that and help me realize that these people are accessible, where prior I just thought they were kind of on a pedestal and they weren't really accessible to talk to and really have great conversations with. And then also in regards with the student advocacy work and getting students involved with CCL, being able to work with these younger students and finding a place where they actually feel like they have leadership roles within CCL. I worked with Susan Adams on creating a student call that's bi-weekly for high school and middle school students. And what stemmed out of that was actually this youth committee planning for the Third Coast Regional Conference. And I basically let the students lead and figure out what kind of activities that they wanted to have at the Third Coast Regional Conference. And so while I supported them and helped give suggestions, it was tremendously just amazing to see how they all can work together, be really responsible about planning and scheduling, and coming up with novel and profound ideas and ways to get students and young people involved. And so I was just super proud to see these students come together who never met before and they got to meet for the first time at the Third Coast Regional Conference. We planned a panel as part of those events for younger students. It was completely run by all of them. All the panelists were young high school, middle school students. The room was filled with other students. And so allowing them to have that space to lead and be a part of the movement that CCL is creating, I think has been very valuable for them, both realizing that CCL is here to help support them in their efforts on climate action and learning that there is a space for them. Each and every one of us are crucial and are crucially important to CCL's vision, to our mission, and to one another. So I hope you take this opportunity to reflect on your own contributions or future contributions and how impactful it has been to the people, both part of the CCL communities, those yet to join, and all others who will be impacted by the work we are trying to accomplish.
Hear, hear. Thank you so much, Destiny. And if any of you on the line or listening in later are interested in especially orienting and passing on any youth involvement in your community to get more active with CCL's Engaging Youth and the higher ed programs, Destiny and then other chapter members are helping out with that youth@citizensclimate.org email address that you see there. So just have them email youth@citizensclimate.org. And I think Destiny's story is one of profound transformation that a lot of us can identify with, and especially in uplifting the role and the importance of young adults and their future in this fight as we uplift the importance of climate action. So let's talk quickly about why lobby as a citizen. What is the rationale? Why is it that we want to do this? Well, there's really a simple reason why we have the stereotypes associated with lobbying and why companies pay so much money for them. It's because it actually works. And the main point is that successful lobbyists, whether they're paid or passionate citizens, develop relationships. So fortunately, you don't need millions of dollars to actually do the most important element of being an effective lobbyist, and that's relationship development. So let's look really quickly at the role of citizens then within that role. So what is the role of citizens? Well, we know that it's not possible for members of Congress or even all of their staff to know every detail about every precise policy. They, just like anyone else, will rely on others to inform them, and that's one of the main reasons that we meet with them. The other thing to really consider is that if we're not meeting with them, then who is? Lobbyists meet with the office frequently, so should we. Lobbying, if you want to break it down, is simply making the case for what you believe Congress should do. It's that plain and simple, and all of you are equally capable of doing that. I think another key element to think through is the role and the type of constituents. Sam hinted at this earlier too, because there are many theories of change that really we can all play. So when setting a legislator's daily agenda, constituents always figure prominently. We know that through our conversations with congressional offices. Any constituent who makes the effort, especially to travel to Washington, D.C., as you are, will almost always get a meeting where a member of Congress will stop in or have his or her staff especially join. A survey of congressional staffers from the Congressional Management Foundation found that constituents who are able to express an interest, not just an opinion, have more influence. And there's really two different types of constituents that, not always have given equal weight. So let's kind of think through what these might look like. On one side, you're a constituent who stands up at a town hall and says, I think we should reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And the congressman or that member of the city council, whatever it might be, will file that in one part of their own brain. But imagine that same citizen, or maybe one following right after them, says, I think that we should reduce greenhouse gas emissions because my 3-year-old daughter has respiratory problems. Now, that person listening in as a policymaker files it in a completely different compartment. That person has a much stronger bond to the legislator, and they're much more likely to think about the greater obligations to integrate their concerns with their decision making. So I think the key thing to highlight here is that constituents with a genuine interest and a story are much more likely to have an influence than those who are just telling or sharing their opinion. Let's just take a quick review of some of these key differences. So for paid lobbyists, you can see, CCL lobbying and professional lobbying, where we have advantages compared to them. Hired guns versus an actual constituent that is authentic and lives and votes in their district. Paid to have an opinion versus having an actual passionate interest that brought them all the way to DC to talk about them. Frequently living in DC compared to those that are only there to make a point and to build that relationship. And then lastly, really being keyed in on the district as a citizen lobbyist compared to those that may be in DC as paid lobbyists, rarely having that finger on the pulse and being in the district that representative actually is in charge of making sure to look out for the constituents' interests in. So let's transition to talk about the importance of building relationships. And to do that, what I'd love to do is bring in the powerful story that Krystal Ford would like to share. Krystal Ford is a PTA president up in upstate New York and also a CCL volunteer, and I'll let her take her story away.
So I'm Krystal Ford. I'm a mom of 2 young children. I have a 5-year-old and I have a 7-year-old. And very recently, I've become very involved in fighting climate change. It was not on my radar a couple of years ago. I mean, I've always heard about it, but I never did anything about it. But I'm now that mom who talks about climate change at birthday parties, and I'm the PTA president, so I've asked the PTA membership to endorse a couple of carbon pricing bills, one at the federal level, one at the state level. My story of how I came to know CCL happened about 2 years ago. I went to an activist fair or something for climate change, and I saw a panel on carbon pricing, and I was like, what is carbon pricing? I have no idea what carbon pricing is. I feel like I hear about it a lot. I don't know what it is. So I go, and someone from CCL gives a great presentation, and a couple months later, I find myself in Washington, DC. I'm going to the big conference. I am lobbying for the first time. And then on the last day, I got to go and meet with my representative and a few other representatives from the state. And, I took my obligatory selfie with the Capitol building behind me. And it was one of the most powerful experiences going in and going through Capitol Hill and meeting with representatives, sitting down and sharing our story and sharing our concerns, hearing from them, and just having like a real conversation about climate change. And I was hooked. So after that, I've been back to DC 3 times to lobby. I've lobbied in district with my representative and also my state level representatives. And that first conference basically like kicked off what has now become my life. So the first time I met with my representative in 2017, we had a good conversation about climate change. We were all on the same page. Climate change was definitely an issue, something that they cared very passionately about. And another thing that's really important is that when we meet with our representative, we're always asking like, what can we do to help you? Like, how can we support you to make sure that, if you do sign on, we're there to support you. So does that mean we have to reach out to certain communities? Is there any big businesses or nonprofits you want us to reach out to? And the last meeting we had, they had actually said, yeah, it would be great if we had this environment organization on board. and our chapter did the work, and we got their support. So I think it's so important to think about that this is a two-way street. It's not just we go in and show up and say, we want you to do this. It's like, okay, we want you to do this. This is really important, but what do you need from us? And where are you at? And working together, because it is a relationship. And then I went back a couple more times, and then I found out that our representative had introduced their own version of carbon pricing bill. And I was really excited because I thought, okay, so I guess something has changed since the last two meetings. And I think it's because we show up, we talk, we listen, and we've managed to show a lot of support in our district. We've been very active, and you hope that what you're doing is actually making a difference. And I feel like our meetings did make a difference. And it's a very positive experience, and really feel like that instead of feeling anxiety and fear around the future, I feel very hopeful. Having this bill, having this, my chapter support, but also this much wider support across the country, kind of gives me an encouragement to try things I never would have tried before. And yeah, I just keep on trying. So it's all thanks to CCL. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much, Krystal. That was exactly the window into really looking at the importance of building relationships and how they can not only transform your one-to-one moving a member of Congress forward, but your own life, your own advocacy, your own goals. I think we can all identify also with Krystal's element where she shared how when she walked into the first time she'd ever heard of a carbon pricing panel, she didn't even know what they were talking about. So really appreciate the authenticity behind that story. I also will say that we are just going to go a little bit past the top of the hour here because we still have one more story with getting to make sure that Grant Couch has a chance to share too. So if you have to drop off, we entirely understand. We'll show you where you can find that recording afterwards. I put it in the chat. You can always email me as well at Brett@citizensclimate.org. But let's just do these last couple of slides and make sure to get to Grant's story as well, everyone. All right, so when Krystal talked about the power of building relationships, how do we really go about building something that's even more long-term, that's meaningful with your member of Congress or your staff? Well, for anyone familiar with Dale Carnegie's training, you're taught that the best way to win friends and influence people is to understand someone else's problems and interests. So it's important for us to understand how to influence someone, right? Now, as an advocate, you'll be much more powerful if by starting the conversation, you actually ask a congresswoman's, about their kid who just went to college, or, tie back when you've had that last conversation, how you saw her picture in the newspaper recently at a ribbon cutting, congratulating them on a recent legislative accomplishment, you name it, right? Part of the reason that makes lobbyists so successful at their job is because they know the issues, and because they also have become trusted advisors as well as the experts. And we can do that too. So we have specific information regarding how our policy will impact their state or district. No one else has that information. Every congressional office knows those in-district advocates who keep on staying on top of the issues and don't hesitate to offer help or advice on how a legislator should vote, and making sure to really just keep in regular contact with your legislator, as all of these stories tonight have really highlighted, provides a valuable service to legislators and their staff and helps keep them accountable to voters. It's also, following the CCL way, a method of really operating with respect, gratitude, and appreciation. It's not just a slogan, it's really the cornerstone of who we are, as well as how we can build effective relationships. So remember, that's the most valuable tool that we have at our disposal. It's really key to remember that the knowledge of how a policy will impact that state or district, and doing the research ahead of time to really set yourself up where you can highlight not only how the region is already being impacted, by our changing climate, but by how the Energy Innovation Act will directly benefit those constituents is really the most valuable tool for any of us to bring in with our knowledge base to those meetings. So let's share one last story, and that is the wonderful story of Grant Couch, CCL's Conservative Caucus co-founder. And Grant harkens back to an earlier day in CCL's early past, I guess, and I'll let him take it away from here.
Hi, I'm Grant Couch, and I've been part of CCL since June of 13, back when we were getting excited about crossing the 5,000 person threshold. It was interesting. I spent all this time studying the issue of climate, both science and the economic impact. And I coincidentally found myself returning from Europe through DC on the day that the conference was going to start in 2013. And I'd only found out about CCL a week or two before, and I thought, well, I'm going to get off the plane and go to the conference. And during one of the keynote speaks by Dr. Tsu, who is an economist and tax attorney, is given a keynote talk about taxing carbon. He interrupted himself to ask the audience, how many Republicans do we have here? 3 hands went up. Worse than that, the snickers were audible. So after that talk, I went up to Mark Reynolds, who I'd come to know very well 20 minutes earlier, and said, Mark, we got a problem. We need more Republicans in this room if we're going to make a difference. And he said, you're right. Do something about it. So that's the benefit of being part of a volunteer organization. So that from that beginning, we now have the Conservative Caucus. And for me, CCL has allowed me to get into politics in a way that's honestly beautiful. I was born in West Virginia, born into a Republican household, which was a rare thing in West Virginia. And I had parents that spoke frequently of the political machine run by the unions and the Democrats, the machine, and all kinds of negative comments about politicians, well, about Democrats. And as I got older and old enough to vote, Vietnam was going on, I didn't want to have anything to do with politics. And I really became apolitical. I never signed up for either party. And it was sort of a pox on both houses view for me, which is unfortunate because that's not how our great country should be working. And CCL invited me, introduced me basically to becoming a really engaged citizen and allowed me to feel comfortable walking in those halls and meeting the folks that have the responsibility of our government working for us. We own our government. Each of us owns the government. They work for us. And although it was a little intimidating the first day I walked the halls of Congress back in 13, which was when House of Cards was out, and I wasn't sure walking down the halls underneath the corridors and the basements, who was going to jump out and grab me. But until that time, until I actually showed up for our appointed lobby meeting with my fellow CCLers, some new and some old, I had this unfortunate view of politicians being not the best people. And what I found in every single one of my lobby meetings, and I've been in over 60 now, whatever side of the aisle you're on, they have their different measure of wanting to work for the country. They obviously have some power and pride in there, and they've got some ego, but they're there to serve the country in one form or another from their own perspective. And they've got limited bandwidth, they've got limited time, they've got, most importantly, limited political capital. But they're always gracious and they always receive us. And I think one of the reasons why they recognize and receive us as well as they do is because I think CCL does a fantastic job of training us to try to be as nonpartisan as possible, recognizing that this is a partisan issue, of course, but that we need to have both sides of the aisle get behind this and to work together. At the end, we're all the same people and we all have the same globe within which to live, and we need to recognize how important it is to work together and to develop human-to-human relationships. So thank you all for being part of CCL. I'm really happy to be on your team.
Beautiful. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Grant, for your story as well. And let's tie that to one final reflection, and that is this. You are listening to this webinar. You are going to be meeting with your member of Congress. You are going to have the chance to tell your own story and really be able to highlight what brought you to DC. So what we've heard from Sam, what we've heard from Destiny, what we've heard from Krystal, and now Grant is really the chance to share knowledge one of two ways. You can push it out, or you can pull them in with your own story. And really being able to key in on your goal as the key goal as a storyteller, to be able to impact the way that your audience, in this case, the congressional member or their staff, thinks, feels, and acts is absolutely key. You know, talking about the importance of sharing local impacts, our study guide this year, you know, continues to emphasize the different ways that you can build out and really highlight climate impacts in your own storytelling. The Congressional Management Foundation reminds us that citizen advocates are most influential when they provide personalized and local information to Congress. And we really want to just be able to highlight in your own preparation, feeling comfortable to highlight your own community's quality of life and economic future, and recommend using that main studies and local impacts page on Community to be able to highlight what that is for you. And you can see here as the summary, you know, the three elements to your story that you heard throughout tonight in each of our vignettes is really just a before element, an after element, and a what's changed element. And all of you are equally capable of telling and putting together such an empowered story, you know, in your own discovery. You know, even if it's just 15 to 20 seconds, you can have the chance, whether you are an inspired mom advocating for the future of your kids, whether you're a young adult bringing the voices of college students from your community, whether you're a formerly apolitical conservative who's caught the passion to really unite people together on common solutions for climate, your story matters, and you can actually make a difference through bringing it and really moving the hearts and minds of Congress members as well.
So again, the main messages are you can make a profound difference with your voice as a citizen. Number two, you probably haven't because of your sense of powerlessness and resignation about politics, especially federal politics. Message three, if you find an organization that's committed to dissolving the powerlessness, one like CCL, you can make that profound difference.
And then if you're interested also in being able to reach out to Sam or myself, or just participating in the community forums, which are always a robust place where conversations are happening. Sam's best contact information that he recommended tonight is civiccourage.org/contact-us. That'll get right to the Civic Courage website and his handle. You can always email me at brett@citizensclimate.org, and you can always ask questions on the community forums, simply just going to community.citizensclimate.org/forums. So with that, let's close with a powerful quote by the Dalai Lama, and then we'll unmute all lines and have a chance to sign off with each other. If you think you are too small to make a difference, try sleeping with a mosquito. With that, you know that your voice will make a difference. We are so grateful for your time tonight and really being able to participate in your own government. We hope that you found tonight's training useful, and we look forward to seeing you in DC very shortly, everyone. Thank you for being on the line.
Thank you, Brett, and thanks, Sam.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.